we need to have a deep dive into the sticky subject of dirt units. You know what I'm talking about? They're the researchers who are employed by both parties to find out things about their opponents and then take that data and spin it to the press in the most negative light possible. Now, there have been a couple of stories out there this past week about Peter Dutton and his personal finances. One about his long sideline hobby buying and flipping properties in the great Australian tradition. Well, that was broken by James Morrow in the 9 newspapers. According to Massola's reporting, Dutton bought his first property when he was just 19 years old with his dad, and over the course of the next 35 years, traded 26 properties. So, actually, not even that many, not even one a year. And over the course of that time, made a profit of a bit over $6 million. Again, over more than 3 decades. Not bad, but also hardly Clive Palmer sort of numbers. Anyway, there was some talk that this was a hit piece delivered to Massola by Labour's dirt unit. But Massola says no, he dug through the decades of parliamentary declarations himself. How much fun that would have been. And you know what? I believe him. Though the story does, in spite of that, seem to inoculate the Tory-fighting Anthony Albanese against all the raised eyebrows that have surrounded his own career as a landlord and now squire of that $4.3 million clifftop home on the New South Wales Central Coast that makes him look like he's already checked out of the job. But, and this is where it gets grubby, there's been a second story going around suggesting that Peter Dutton may have improperly bought bank shares in 3 of the big banks on the dip during the global financial crisis. Just before the then Labour government announced $4 billion in guarantees securing the banks against calamity. Now, Labour has been running these charges out all over the place and even ran them out in Parliament in Senate estimates where under parliamentary privilege, MPs and senators can say what they like with impunity. Here's Labour Finance Minister Katie Gallagher having a go.
You know, we have questions.
You're throwing mud at Peter Dutton. That's all you've got.
Grubby.
It's so grubby, Minister. You're better than that, apparently.
Well, it was just a coincidence, was it, that there was a lot of shares purchased the day before a bank day?
Say it outside this room.
Go
What
on.
a coincidence.
Go on.
Go on.
Hey, just asking questions, right? If you ask me, that's some pretty unedifying stuff. And Labour went even so far as to bring Godwin Gretsch into the story. Now, if that name sounds familiar, you will recall that he was the Treasury bureaucrat behind the fake email that led to the Utegate affair that blew up in Malcolm Turnbull's face way back in 2009. Back then, the claim was that Kevin Rudd had sought special treatment for a car dealer mate who'd given him a ute to use in his campaign. And, of course, it all turned out to be a nonsense. Just as, I reckon, with these claims of insider trading. It was a desperate and grubby move by Labour, I think, and one which again seemed all about trying to do one thing. Not tell the truth about Peter Dutton, but rather simply define him. Because Peter Dutton, to an awful lot of voters, he remains a blank canvas in many voters' minds by throwing mud, fairly or not, at him and trying to make it stick. Now, no one really believes that in either of these 2 instances, whether it's the property portfolio or the bank shares, Dutton did anything wrong. His only crime, it would seem, is to be the son of a brickie who made good building a nest egg and then went into conservative politics. Well, really, only those still suffering from tall poppy derangement syndrome could be annoyed about that. This is something that is only wrong to the true believers of the left who think the only way members of the working class should ever come good is by working their way up the ranks of the union movement until they can get themselves pre-selected for a safe seat and then eventually retire onto the board of a union superfund. That's the respectable way to go about success in the Labour book. And I'm sorry, but also forgive me for bringing in a bit of American political lore here. I can't help it. You know, it's who I am. But this whole saga, This whole strategy reminds me so much of the legendary story about former President Lyndon Johnson, and he was in a tough congressional race in the South. He wanted to accuse his opponent of doing something so lewd, rude, and unnatural that it can't even be mentioned here. Now, Johnson's aides said the charge was false and that there was no way he could go out there on the stump and say it. And Lyndon Johnson reportedly replied to his aides, "Yeah, but I want to make him deny it." Well, you know what? Labor is doing the same thing here, sticking bogus claims of insider trading and simply doing too well for working-class men for their liking to Dutton, and then making him deny the charges. It's all low-rent stuff, but I tell you what, I fear that the next 5, 6, who knows, maybe more weeks of campaigning, we will see more of the same.